What is happening, everybody? I am the Architect, and today, as the title suggests, I will be giving you a list of the top 5 best manga that I read in 2020. Now keep in mind that I only started collecting and reading manga consistently since June of this year, so we're only going off about 6 months here. But I still read a ton of really great manga, and I'm going to talk about that today. But before we get into that, if you're new to the channel, I post weekly manga-related videos, so if that's something you're interested in and you want to check out more, hit the like button, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Got some really cool stuff that I want to do, especially next year. Next year I want to go crazy with some cool ideas. Down in the description you can find links to my Twitter, Instagram, and also to my Right Stuff affiliate link. If you want to support the channel even more and you plan on buying from rightstuffanime.com, if you use my link, I'll get a portion of every single purchase at no extra cost to you. And everything I get from that will be fully invested back into the channel to fund future giveaways and other cool stuff like that. So if you're interested, that's all in the description down there. Now before we get into this list, I do have to mention that I'm only going to be talking about series that I either finished or read a significant portion of. So series like Monster and Beastars and Chainsaw Man will not be on this list because I've only read a couple of volumes of each. They have a chance to make next year's list, but they are just exempt from this one. But that still leaves a ton of series that are eligible for this. And before we get into the top 5, I do have an honorable mention, and that is this series right here, the Quintessential Quintuplets. This series was super fun, and I was so immersed with this throughout most of the year, just wanting to know who the main character was going to marry at the end of the story. It was just a great, really fun ride, and it would definitely have made the top 5 had I not read all the way to the ending. And I'm not going to spoil it for you guys, but let's just say I wasn't the biggest fan of the way that this ended. I felt that the last few volumes, the last 20 chapters or so, were super rushed. I felt like this could have needed at least another volume or two to really hash out things, but it just didn't get that. And to be honest, it did knock the quality of this down just a tad bit for me. That being said, I still would recommend this story. I mean, as a shonen romance story, it doesn't really get much better than this. It's just really fun to kind of guess which girl is going to marry the guy in the end. It's wholesome. It's a harem type of story. You would think that there'd be tons of fan service, but there is almost no fan service in this story. It is completely wholesome. It's funny. The characters are very lovable. I'm Team Nino all the way, by the way. So, it really is a great story, and it was one of the best-selling manga in Japan this past year. So, it's definitely got its merits. I just wasn't a fan of the ending. That might not be the case for you, so I would not want that to deter you from getting into the series. I still think you should read this because it is a fun ride. Now let's get into the actual top 5 list. At number 5 is this little gem of a series, Komi Can't Communicate. Now, if you've seen some of my other videos, you've seen me talk about how much I enjoy Komi-san. And really, I had to include this on the list, not because it has some kind of crazy story. I mean, if you're looking for like a really immersive story or a really expansive fantasy world or just heart-gripping drama, you're not going to get it with this. This is not that kind of story. This is more or less just a kick back and relax and enjoy a nice, wholesome, sweet kind of story that just brings you up. It's an upper. If you're feeling down, you read a volume of Komi. If you just got done reading a really gruesome death scene in Vinland Saga, you read Komi. If you read anything from Inio Asano, you read Komi. It's a pick-me-up kind of series, man. The comedy is very lighthearted. The characters are cute and quirky and wacky. The art is not going to blow you away necessarily. It's a 4-panel manga. It almost looks like a comic strip. The stories aren't always interconnected. There's little side stories and gags that kind of push the story along, but I don't know. Every time I read this, I'm just smiling the whole way because it is just funny and cute and just a good time. So that's why it's only at number 5. It's not going to blow you away with storyline or the characters. They're not deep, they're not super deep, and whatever else, but it's just a fun time. It's just a nice little pick-me-up. So, number 5. Now, number 4 is almost the complete opposite of something like Komi-san, and it is Message to Adolf by Osamu Tezuka. Now, this story has a real deep, dark, complex type of storyline. You know, it's a historical fiction manga. I'm a big fan of historical fiction. especially dealing around this time period. This deals with around World War II and focuses on 3 people named Adolf who grew up in Germany and Japan around this time. And it is an expansive world that's going on here that Tezuka put together. I mean, there are interlocking stories between characters. This is a very text-heavy manga. There's not a whole lot of action, at least not at first. There are parts of the story that kind of lull a little bit. That's just very dialogue-heavy. And there are themes in the story that are kind of hard to read at times, especially when you know that this is based on real events that happen to real people. So it gets heavy, and it gets really, really dark and depressing at times. But really, it is such a well put together story from start to finish. And I mean, Tezuka is a legend when it comes to this sort of storytelling. So I would recommend this with a little bit of a caveat that this is based on real events and the themes can get really dark and really sad. So if you can manage that sort of thing, if you're a fan of historical fiction around the World War II time period, then yeah, go ahead and check this out because it's still a very, very good story. It's also long too. I mean, there are 2 books and they're just about as thick as this. There's a lot of text, so it does take a while to get through, but I think it was still a really, really, really good story, and I enjoyed it. Now we're on to number 3, and I really can't have a top 5 list this year without talking about the one that started it off for me. It's right here on my shelf, Tokyo Ghoul. Now I've mentioned in past videos that Tokyo Ghoul was the first manga series that I collected in its entirety, and pretty much first one I finished in its entirety. You know, being an anime fan for most of my life and not really getting into manga as much, I had heard for years that the Tokyo Ghoul manga was leaps and bounds better than the anime adaptation. And having seen some of the Tokyo Ghoul anime and now reading all of Tokyo Ghoul, the manga, I would have to agree. This is still a classic, and it's still a series that I would recommend to new manga collectors. Someone who wants to get into manga, but might not necessarily be interested in the shonen type of shows, the Narutos, the Dragon Balls, the Bleach. They wanted like a darker, more mature story. I would definitely recommend Tokyo Ghoul to them. It still holds up, in my opinion. I mean, the action is crazy. The character development is solid. The artwork is phenomenal. I mean, it's easy to see why this always comes up as one of the most popular series in manga, even to this day. I mean, it's not the greatest series of all time. It's not going to blow everybody away, but it is still a great story, and it's still something I would recommend, especially to new collectors. I mean, this is what I started off with, and well, it's gone pretty good for me. And now we come to number 2, and this might surprise a few people. People who've watched my videos enough might be expecting a particular series to be number 1. Well, I will tell you right now that number 2 on my top 5 manga this year is Vinland Saga. Now the reason it might be surprising is because those of you who have seen my videos before know that I have given such heavy praise to this series. Every time I get a new volume in or read a new volume, I have praised this to the moon and back. And it is true that this series is still incredibly amazing. It is just mind-blowing how good this series is. There's just one series that I read this year that just edged this out for number 1, and I will talk about that in a minute. But I still have to talk a little bit about Makoto Yukimura's masterpiece here, because it is a masterpiece in my opinion. This story gripped me so much. You know, again, I love historical fiction, although I've never really focused on like a Viking story before. This story hooked me from the get-go, and there's just so much that I can talk about. I could do an entire video just talking about Vinland Saga. 2 things that I do want to focus on mostly about this series is the character development and the artwork. The characters here go through so much hardship, so many trials, so much good and bad, you know, happening to these characters, man. And you read it and you grow with them and you feel everything that happens to them. And that is a sign of impeccable writing. When you can put yourself into the shoes of these characters and just feel their pain when something bad happens, or feel that you're growing with them, that you're traveling along with them on their journeys, man. That is just what that is the pinnacle of what Vinland Saga is about. And it's just all the characters. It's Thorfinn, it's Prince Canute, it's all these guys. It is just really, really gripping. Incredible writing by Makoto Yukimura. Just incredible. And second only to his incredible writing is his incredible artwork. I mean, when you have double page spreads like this, And that's only a taste of what Makoto Yukimura does here, man. His artwork is some of the best that I've ever seen in anything. So Vinland Saga is still really, really high on my list. This is a must-read, in my opinion. If you're serious about manga, you have to try out Vinland Saga. You have to give this a shot, because it's changed my life, man. I don't think that's too much of an exaggeration. It is fantastic. And finally, we've made it to the #1 best manga that I read in 2020. Now, what series could have possibly surpassed Vinland Saga with me? Well, it just so happens that earlier this year, before I started making manga content on YouTube, I read one particular series that has stuck with me since then. I read it basically in one sitting, and it is a masterpiece, in my opinion. And that would be A Silent Voice by Yoshitoki Oima. Now, those of you who are familiar with this series are probably familiar with the anime movie that came out for this a couple of years ago. And I watched that movie several times, subbed and dubbed. I thought it was an incredible movie. And yeah, your boy cried like a baby. But the movie was so great that I wanted to get into the original source material and read the manga. And honestly, the manga might be better than the movie. I mean, the manga goes so much deeper into the character's psyche and their personality traits and their emotions and feelings as things are going on, which makes sense because it's hard to condense a 7-volume series into, what, an hour and 40-minute long movie? I mean, that's almost impossible. There's definitely a lot more that the manga can offer than the movie. There's an entire B-plot that is completely dropped from the movie that you can get here. It's nothing huge, but it is a nice little added addition and maybe incentive to pick up the manga even though you've seen the movie. And yeah, I cried again while reading it. I'm not too much of a man to admit that kind of thing, you know? I mean, these eyes, man. These eyes have seen some shit. But seriously, guys, the one thing that sets this apart from Vinland Saga and the other series that I talked about in this video is the fact that this story is real, it's raw, it's relatable. It's sad because everything that happens in this story can and does happen in real life. You know, dealing with bullies, dealing with disabilities like a hearing problem or anything like that. Trying to redeem yourself after doing something terrible, and you know you're doing something terrible, and growing up, maturing, learning to accept that what you did was bad and be willing to learn and grow from that. That is the biggest takeaway from this, and I think that's what hits the hardest emotionally with this story. And Yoshitoki Oima presents this in such a perfect way. This is one of the only series right now that I have as a 10 out of 10 on Mao, and I think it deserves every bit of those points, man. This story is on a whole nother level, and it is a must read, I think, for anybody who wants to see just a real raw story like this. Even if you've seen the movie is great, the movie is amazing. It did a really, really great job at presenting the story in a really solid way. But the manga goes even deeper into that. So if you enjoyed the movie, I implore you to pick up the manga because it is special. It's just special, and I think it deserves to be at the top of my best manga list of 2020. So that is going to do it for the top 5 manga that I read in 2020. I would love to hear some of the best manga that you guys read this year, so put that down in the comments section below. Also, if you liked the video, hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. All of that helps me and helps the channel, and it makes me smile. So at least you know you're doing that. Also, my Right Stuff affiliate link and social media are down in the description below if you guys want to check that out. And look forward to more videos this year. I have about 4 or 5 more videos I want to put out before the end of the year. You know, we're getting close to the holidays and we're getting close to the new year, and I'm super excited what's to come. And you know, I'd be happy if you guys continue to stick around and just be you, because you guys are cool. So on that note, I am the Anarchitect, and I'll see you in the next video.